Sega
The man can fight Chuck Norris to a standstill, yet he can't handle a horde of zombies. What sense does that make? Alright, so House of the Dead. So, again, another groundbreaking game from Sega. While it was basically a follow-up to Virtua Cop in regards to the fact that it was the second game built on their M2 hardware, I think it was. And it stood out from Virtua Cop for taking that need for accuracy, but also amping up the violence and gore to the nth degree. When House of the Dead came out, it was actually very controversial for its violence. No one had ever seen anything like this in the arcades before. And it got to the point where Sega would actually have a curtain on the arcade machine in order to dissuade little kids from looking at the game. But that just made people want to play the game even more, so it was ineffective. So needless to say, it was ripe for the pickings for a port to consoles. Unfortunately, Sega made one teeny little miscalculation with this game. Even though the Saturn was on the decline and the game probably wouldn't do well, and the fact that, you know, the Dreamcast was on the horizon, they, for some reason, decided to do a port of House of the Dead to the Sega Saturn, and the results were awful. I mean, like, look at this. Look at this. I mean, do I even need to say anything more? I mean, that's a huge step down from the arcade game. And, like, graphics are one thing, but the gameplay is screwed up too. There's like this weird input delay from when you pull the trigger, from when you actually get your shot off, and that can mess with you more than you would think, especially when you're dealing with airborne enemies. There's one boss in particular that is really hard in the Saturn version for that reason alone. And to make matters worse, there are loading screens in this game, and the loading screens are placed in the most inopportune places. Usually right before a zombie ambushes you, so while you're waiting for the game to load, once the loading screen is finished, the zombie is likely to attack you, so if you don't have your gun up, you're probably going to take a hit. It's just, man, it's just an awful, awful port of the game. And that's not to say it doesn't have anything else going for it outside of that. I mean, in regards to the content, I mean, like, the game is here and the music is still there, sound effects are still fine, and there are some unique mechanics to it too. There's actually a secondary mode where you can play the game with certain parameters, like a gun that only has 2 bullets, but those bullets do an absurd amount of damage, which is kind of cool. But at the end of the day, this version of House of the Dead is just a complete train wreck, and I have no idea why Sega didn't just cancel this version and move development to the Dreamcast. And, I mean, look at how well the Dreamcast version of House of the Dead 2 came out. I mean, that would have been a great idea to port both of them to the console. And it also doesn't help that the Saturn version, as far as I know, is the only home console port of House of the Dead. It was never released on any other console aside from a PC version, which is hard to get a hold of. So, unless you want to resort to emulation or pay an arm and a leg for an arcade game, the Sega Saturn is your only choice. And it's a terrible choice too, because like this is one of the most expensive games on the Saturn. Really, I think you could buy an arcade machine for the money you'd pay for the Saturn version. And the Saturn version isn't even going to work right. I mean, the light guns don't work well with modern TVs, so like, man, like, you shouldn't have done that, Sega. You shouldn't have done that. Anyway, guys, we've gone through all the games I want to play for the retrospective, so tomorrow we're going to look at 10 more highlights before we count down the best of the best for the Sega Saturn, so stay tuned.